This week on Talking Royals, Chris and Lizzie share their reflections on how the royal family marks the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Europe.
He really seemed engaged and interested when he was talking to the veterans and listening to their stories and asking questions. And I think that's what it's all about. That's what George represents.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to be prepared to be disappointed. How can you compare 30,000 poppies with 900,000? It still looks amazing.
We've got a powerful message from veterans of the conflict.
I've got grandchildren, great-grandsons. I don't want them hurt. Let's all live in peace, and we can do, you know.
And the King and Queen prepare to head to Canada with our team in tow.
It's involved in the state opening of Parliament. This is incredibly rare.
Also, speaking from experience, they have really good sweets at the back of the plate.
Hello and welcome to Talking Royals. I'm Charlene White, and as ever I'm joined by both Chris and Lizzie, who are with me in the studio, and you're both still wearing your blue bands because you've come straight from Westminster Abbey because you've been at the service of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you know, when there's lots of these big moments, we end up with a kind of collection of lanyards and bands, and you won't be surprised that I lose half of mine as well, of course. So, but this is the one I think that got us into the
Westminster Abbey.
Of course, for anyone who isn't aware, but honestly, we've been talking about this all week on the news. The service is all about remembering 80 years since the end of the Second World War, so VE Day. It's been a busy week, hasn't it?
An incredibly busy week because royal family have sort of led the nation in the commemorations for the 80th anniversary of VE Day. So it's been a very important and significant week, and particularly poignant, I think, for the royal family. They were, in 1945, it was King George VI that gave that radio address at 9 p.m. on the 8th of May, 1945. So significant role then and now.
It's kind of what the royals do at these kind of moments, isn't it? Because actually we've had a kind of lot of jubilees recently, platinum, golden, and then we've had royal weddings, and we've had coronations and things. Actually, if you were to look ahead, there's not very much in the diary where you get these kind of moments of national celebration. I think this started off on Monday with that procession through London. I was kind of thinking beforehand, is anyone going to turn up? Does anyone know about this? And if you look at any pictures of the Mall on Monday afternoon, a lot of people did, unless they were all just
despite the weather. Actually,
the weather was horrendous.
It was cold and grey, but actually, as always with these sorts of events, it was the Mall was.
There's a kind of routine that they do. So obviously, the Mall is closed for when all the sort of parades happen. Of course, the royals weren't parading this time; they were just watching it from a stand at the bottom. And after everyone's been through, and the royal family go back into Buckingham Palace, and they sort of open up the gates bit by bit, and the whole sort of crowd descends down, and then sort of goes around the Queen Victoria Memorial. So it's I love going down there with them. We always end up doing the piece de camera there, and sort of chatting to some people, and everyone's always happy to chat. It's lovely atmosphere.
Such a nice atmosphere.
Brilliant.
Everyone's incredibly wants to be a part of it, wants to chat. But of course, the focus this week has been on the veterans, and they were sitting on the dais by the Queen Victoria Memorial with members of the royal family watching that procession. They are the focus of this week, and they are what the royal family are shining a light on. And they were sitting sort of in amongst the royal family. So I
mean, you two have covered everything that's happened in the past few days, and we've seen loads on the TV and in the papers and what have you, but I was really interested in your best bits or the things you've enjoyed most this week. What would you say yours is, Chris?
Mine. I think we went to the Tower of London where they have reinstalled those ceramic poppies. So anyone remembers 2014?
Yeah.
Unbelievable images.
I've got one.
You bought one, did you? Right, okay. So you can help with the story then, because there were then nearly 900,000 of these ceramic poppies, and the images we looked at the other day. We were editing. We looked at this aerial shot of the Tower of London, just a sea of red. It looked phenomenal. And then we used the pictures of the late Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip walking through that field of poppies. Stunning. This time, there are 30,000, and I went, okay, I'm going to be prepared to be disappointed. How can you compare 30,000 poppies with 900,000? Because people like you bought them.
Yes.
You were encouraged to, and it was all part of the charity. But it still looked amazing, just because they're quite big. They stand up quite tall from the ground. And we were talking to the guy who actually made a lot of them and came up with the original design. We spoke to a veteran there. It just and the Queen. That's the reason we were there. Sorry, should mention that Queen Camilla was there and she opened it. So it really was a nice.
Yeah,
it was a really poignant moment. Yeah,
looked nice.
It is quite something. I remember it first time round when you arrive at the Tower of London and you can almost see a red from a distance, but is that it? Is that it? And then you arrive and I don't know, it really hits you in a way that you don't expect, because how often do you see an art installation like that, but especially within that environment and with the meaning that it has.
It's the sheer volume, the numbers of poppies that are there. And this time they actually cascade over the edge of the White Tower. That's the kind of main tower in the middle of the Tower of London. And they kind of splash on the floor. And, they're saying it's like the blood pouring off, because the poppies at the end of the day do represent people who have given their lives. And it cascades down all the way even into the water by what's called Traitor's Gate, where they used to bring people like Anne Boleyn from the barge for not a very nice experience. It was just really, really beautiful. And but I suppose one standout moment from being there was a veteran that Queen Camilla had met. He's called Henry Rice. He's 99 years old. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And just the words he used about his thoughts of the friends who didn't come back. We'll play them to you now because actually we found it really, really moving.
Each one of these poppies represent a man that's given his life for this country. From time to time, I don't have to be anywhere special. Suddenly the thought comes to my mind and I realise that these men, they're not coming back home. I'm just very respectful to them all and I thank them, I admire them. They're my heroes. To all leaders of every country in this world, remember we are still living, having fought the wars. Please, not again. Please, no more. I've got grandchildren, great-grandsons. I don't want them hurt. Let's all live in peace, and we can do,
I mean,
I've that's the second time
really?
I've watched that, and even second time round, it makes me feel just hugely emotional.
The way just 99 years old, and of course, what he's referring to is the fact that we have an aggressor, a different era, different country that was invaded. We look at Ukraine and Russia. Yeah. And interestingly, on Monday, as part of that procession along the Mall, there were Ukrainian soldiers carrying the Ukrainian flag, also to sort of say, peace isn't with us still after all these years. But yeah, Henry Rice, what a lovely chap. I call them Henry's heroes because he said, I love them, I respect them, they're my heroes. So they're actually, Henry's heroes.
He gave a poppy to the Queen and she planted the last poppy in the installation, along with 5-year-old Harrison. His mum is a yeoman at the tower, and I think what we've seen all week is this coming together of the veterans who are all in their late 90s, early 100s, and the younger generation, with the Queen, the veterans, 5-year-old Harrison planting the poppies. Yeah. But also, we've seen it with Prince George this week going to that tea party for the veterans at Buckingham Palace. And I think...
What was your standout moment of the week?
Would you say that was it?
I think it was one of the most significant moments of the week. And I think it's, it's important that the younger generation remember these stories and, know what happened and have spoken to the veterans. And George had the opportunity to do that. And it's significant because, George is 11 and he is very, very slowly and gradually being introduced to royal life. He will, of course, one day be king. And they have been really careful with him to introduce him slowly and carefully. And I think we all regarded this as his most significant public engagement to date. And he really seemed engaged and interested when he was talking to the veterans and listening to their stories and asking questions. And I think that's what it's all about. That's what George represents, is that younger generation, but also that future role that he'll have. He will be Commander-in-Chief one day.
Oh, yeah, and I think when you see him doing all the talking to the veterans that he has been doing this week, when he was on sat with all the other royals and the veterans at the parade on Monday, it's like, wow, I think maybe for a younger generation, perhaps they understand a little bit more what it means to be a king in waiting.
Yes, yeah, and I thought that, that he was actually separated for that engagement from his younger siblings. So, it's almost like they thought, okay, George is ready for this. But even actually in the stands, Princess Charlotte, was sat next to her mother, but next to her mother was a veteran, and they were having a conversation. The three of them were having conversations there as well. So, this theme that Lizzie just touched on was also on display at Westminster Abbey when you had a 100-year-old veteran, Joyce Walding, giving a reading, as well as the great-grandson of Winston Churchill, Alexander Churchill, who is 10 years old. So again, it's about passing on the stories to the younger.
I think another moment that we both were both really liked was watching on the dais. The King was sitting next to Joy True, a veteran, and they were engaged in conversation throughout, weren't they?
Yes.
They were really chatting away. Yeah. And she said afterwards, she was just chatting to reporters afterwards, and she said, the King, how great it was, but at one point he tucked her into her blanket, which I thought was
it's really touching. It's interesting to talk about George at 11 because the Queen was 14 at the start of the war, and didn't she give a speech to other children?
Yes.
During the war, just sort of get your chin up and what have you.
That's right, from Windsor. It was a very, very important address on the radio, sitting next to her sister Margaret Rose. I've heard the speech a number of times. We've used it before, haven't we? And then obviously during the war, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service. There's those famous pictures of her with a spanner looking inside the bonnet of a vehicle. And at the end of the war, of course, she was in her uniform of the ATS on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, and that's when she then famously went mingling in the crowds on this evening. So it was this evening, 80 years ago. Well, we were recording this on VE Day. She was there just running around London.
Yeah. I love that. Her and her sister Margaret slipped into the crowds unnoticed.
And didn't they go to quite a few of, very, very well-known, very posh, was it Fortnam's? Did she run
the Ritz?
The Ritz, that was it.
Yeah.
She must have walked quite far because, the Ritz is the other side of Green Park. She also said that there's some recording of her that Buckingham Palace put out today that she walked along Whitehall as well. So she put in a fair few steps that day. If she had an Apple Watch, it would have recorded quite a few steps.
But back in 1985, she spoke about being amongst the crowds on VE Day. Let's take a listen.
We cheered the King and Queen on the balcony and then walked miles through the streets. I remember lines of unknown people linking arms and walking down Whitehall, all of us just swept along on a tide of happiness and relief.
Tide of happiness and relief. And actually, I suppose that's our job this week, is to try and explain through these veterans what it was like after all those years of hardship. And actually, when you think about the Queen, she had her kind of formative years, as you just said, 14 at the start of the war, having to give radio addresses and moving out. You remember King George famously wouldn't leave Buckingham Palace, even though it had been bombed a couple of times. So her formative years, they weren't like other children in the rest of the country, but they were, she was brought up in that wartime generation, which I think a lot of people have said that did add to her serious approach to duty and life and service.
Yeah, I was talking to Jenny Bond earlier on in the week because we did. I was with her on Loose on Monday, and she was sort of talking about, and Jane Moore were talking about the fact that she had those years where she was quite isolated within Windsor Castle and away from family and all of that sort of stuff. And although the severity of the reason why she was there isn't quite the same as COVID, you have got a group of young people currently in the country who have also had periods of isolation and what have you. And perhaps looking at the way in which the Queen and that generation were able to slowly but surely deal with that trauma and are the people they are today. And talking to Henry Rice, that amazing veteran, it's a really good signal for them that although they may still be finding it difficult to recover from that period in time, with time you find strength out of it.
And they are really formative years, for example. And I think there will be a generation that does reflect on COVID and the impact it had on them. And I kind of think the wartime had an impact on the Queen throughout all of her life. She was part of that, famously make do and mend's generation. Yeah. And we used to see pictures of the Queen when she was still receiving guests at Buckingham Palace. And there'd be that 2 or 3-bar electric fire next to her, like you would see from a house in the 70s. And you kind of think, hold on a minute, you're the Queen. Surely you can heat whatever room you like and then whatever. But actually, she was actually quite parsimonious, all the way through her life. And I think that was probably partly due to the wartime. And yes, they're the royal family, but they wanted to experience what in some ways what the country was experiencing.
And the celebrations or commemorations continued, didn't they? Because there was also a concert that the King hosted outside Buckingham Palace as a different way of remembering.
When you say hosted, he wasn't the sort of MC.
I kind of in my head, he was going to be on stage, introduced.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Fleur East.
So VE Day 80, a celebration to remember, was on Horse Guards. And while we joke about the King getting up on stage and emceeing, he didn't do that, but he did get up on stage and he delivered a speech at 9 p.m. And that time is significant because it was exactly 80 years ago, on the 8th of May 1945, that his grandfather, King George VI, delivered a radio address to the nation. So he was sort of echoing not only the timing, but also his grandfather's words.
While our greatest debt is owed to all those who paid the ultimate price, we should never forget how the war changed the lives of virtually everyone.
I think the King kind of felt like yesterday, a national televised concert was a moment for him to, try and bring the nation together in thankful, remembrance of all of those who made so many sacrifices.
I want to take us way back to just last week.
Oh, okay.
Because
that's quite a long time in our world, actually.
Yeah, a lot can happen in a week, as we know. But it was almost
was that
like
pre-Harry interview.
Pre-Harry interview.
Pre-Canada.
Pre-Canada, yes, because I was going to say it was as though we had a crystal ball and knew what was about to be announced. But I'd like to say we didn't know what was going to happen, did we?
Well, I think that comes from our kind of expert analysis, I'd like to say, that now that what were we saying last week? Now that the Canadians have had their election, you've clearly got an opportunity for the King to go visit. And what's happening? He's going to visit.
He's going to visit, and he is going to, it's involved in the state opening of Parliament. This is incredibly rare for the monarch to do that. The Queen did it in, let's get this 1977 and also in 1957.
Yes. But so we hadn't. In other words, Canada's monarch hasn't opened Canada's Parliament since 1977. So
yes,
it's a big deal.
And again, I think it plays into. And again, here's the King now checking off another realm. He's done Australia as the only one he has done so far, but he's checking off another realm where he is head of state. And for all this talk when he said he had cancer, we said, well, that's it. He won't be able to travel. He won't be able to do this. He won't be going anywhere. He's proving that he's still having cancer treatment, but he's quite happy to bob off to Australia or Samoa or Kenya and now
do the
Canada.
job. And that he would only be doing that if he was given the green light and the okay by his doctors. So everything we are getting from conversations with people who know him and are around him is that things are moving in a positive direction.
We've had an email from a listener, viewer in Canada, actually. If you do want to get in touch, it's talkingroyals@itv.com. It's Sheila English, and she said, this is an excellent move by our new Prime Minister. Might help to restore some interest in the monarchy here. Even royalists like me have questioned why we have a king, when aside from a few symbolic gestures so tiny they had to be spelled out, there has been silence, even as we have been threatened by the US. It'll be interesting to see how the king is received.
Oh my goodness, Sheila raises so many good points.
So much to unpack.
There has been silence. Like, has the king criticised Donald Trump? No, we can't criticise Donald Trump because he's invited him for a state visit to the UK, and Keir Starmer, who's our Prime Minister, needs Donald Trump to sign a trade deal, and he wants relations to be good, but yet the King is the King of Canada. I mean, there's so many. Well done, Sheila, for getting it right. But also, like, the fact that the monarchy, is it been a bit absent in Canada? I mean, I've been with the King, 3 times now to Canada. Sorry, when he was Prince of Wales.
Yeah.
I've never been with a monarch to Canada because obviously the late Queen Elizabeth stopped travelling in 2014, 15?
15.
So I always get that date wrong. every time.
That's why you
but exactly. But I think it's really important this visit to Canada,
and it will be really important to him too. He does regularly travel to Canada, and will see this visit as really important. It's our understanding the visit will be quite quick, but no less significant. I think he has. While he hasn't said anything about Canada, he can't. He sits above politics. There have been, small signs he has given about his support for Canada.
Like wearing a Canadian medal.
Exactly.
So
it's not what they say, it's what they do.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, as Sheila says, how the king is received and how impactful his
Of course,
visit
absolutely.
will
And,
be.
we were discussing it in the clip that you ran last week of the king in whenever it was, 1973, of him going under the ice and then deflating himself. Yeah. But there was a little clip of him saying why monarchy matters in Canada.
Yes.
And I wonder whether this whole, we've now got a prime minister in Canada who won the election basically in opposition to Donald Trump. I wonder whether there is a renewed interest in what makes Canada different to the United States. And one of the things that makes it different, it is a realm, its head of state is the king.
It'll be really
they have a prime minister, not a president. So let's see. Yeah.
So my final question is, are you going?
Yes.
Well, actually, I don't think the foreign desk has said you can go yet, have they?
They have.
Oh, okay. They haven't said it to me. I think maybe
said,
Lizzie's
they
going.
They said I can go.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're on the list.
Am I going to have to do that thing we did last time when you were in Rome?
No, actually, because we'll be back.
No, because
we're there so quickly. We'll be back by then, don't worry.
I think it's like in, speak, out.
Oh, right.
So,
okay.
We'll be back by our Thursday recording. No.
All right, then.
You won't be.
But yeah, we're going.
Oh, you're going to be up in the Rockies.
Pack your suitcase.
Pack your suitcase.
Pack your suitcase.
So I think we'll be back in this studio looking a bit sort of haggard. But also, interestingly, here's a point that people might be interested in. Because the king is the head of state, it's not for the Foreign Office to send him out there. It's for Canada to bring him to the country. So often the Prime Minister, used to be Justin Trudeau, now Mark Carney, has to send their plane over to pick the king up because it's their responsibility to get their king
and it'll be
there.
called a royal visit, not a state visit.
I see.
And also speaking from experience, they have really good suites at the back of the plane.
They do.
Do they?
Well, the first one we went on, we thought, this is amazing. There's a whole table of suites.
So Shani's like, actually, hang on, maybe I will
put some in a bag.
Maybe that was in Justin Trudeau's day and Mark Carney's got a,
Well, it sounds
idea.
as if the Canadians are going to fly their plane over to pick up the king, it sounds like there's a plane going spare here. So maybe I could also...
Oh, no, we go with him. Sorry.
We go with.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, right, okay.
Anyway.
Well, that's it for now. Thank you both, of course, for being with us today. And whether you're listening or watching the show, remember you can get in touch if you've got a question for us, just like Sheila English did from Canada. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a statement or just something you want to say. You can get in touch with us at talkingroyals@itv.com. And if you're enjoying the show, we'd love it if you could subscribe to Talking Royals wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. But for now, we will all be back with you. We will next week.